which is really useful because my computer doesn't do that. Anyway, Brooks Wade, Kay Wade. Some of you have met us before. We came into this area about 13 years ago now. We started what used to be a very small business called Jocassee Lake Tours. My husband came to me one day and said, "Honey, I want to buy a boat." And I said, "Well, there's the lake. That sounds good." And then he came back a few weeks later and he said, "Honey, I want to do some tours." And I said, "Oh, well, you know, other people do that." But they didn't do it like he had in mind. So Brooks's vision is the one that has led us through this all the way through. His vision was to learn something about the Jocassee Gorges. And I hope you guys can hear me. I think you can. So his vision was to learn something about the Jocassee Gorges before he took people out and introduced them to this area. And what we found out was that people loved learning about the area and about the lake and about everything that we had to offer. And they came back. And we didn't expect that. Like, I didn't expect it. I didn't expect the same people who came out one month to come the next month and bring their friends and their family. But that was the way our business grew, solely on the count that people are eager to learn. And so somewhere down the line, he said, "Honey, why don't we start a nonprofit?" And that is where Jocassee Wild Outdoor Education was born. We did that because Brooks's background is with childhood education, and he really wanted to have a way to bring children out in the lake. And they come with their families. They came on our tours with their families, but he wanted something that would target children, in particular, school groups. And of course, kids don't make their own money and they don't make their own schedules. And so we decided that if we started a nonprofit and we started raising money, then we could supplement the cost of getting these kids out in the lake into the Jocassee Gorges. And that was where the whole idea for a nonprofit came from. We had already been working with something that was kind of interesting. Brooks had been working for several years with loon researchers. And so when we started this idea in 2018 of a nonprofit, we immediately had something to go under the nonprofit umbrella of outdoor education, because nobody anywhere had studied what this iconic bird that is like the apex of its species does during the winter. But they knew everything about what it did during the summer. And lo and behold, people were interested in that. So we found the right people to work with. We got some very knowledgeable researchers. And we started with a group called Earthwatch, which is an international citizen science group. Earthwatch thought this was important enough to commit 3 years. And so for 3 years, Earthwatchers came to Lake Jocassee and they studied the loons, and then we took over. So we had this ready-made thing when we started the nonprofit. And then we had a friend who bugged me. Is he on here? I don't know. He encouraged us. He encouraged us to start a program that would be something similar to what the South Carolina Master Naturalists do, except very specific to learning about the Jocassee Gorges. And we said, "Hey, that is a great idea. When somebody does that, count us in." And then nobody did it, and he kept encouraging us. So eventually he kind of sat us down and said, "Listen, you need to do this." And we said, "Okay, we'll do it." And because we need other people to collaborate with, we called in all of our very bright guides that were working with us by then with Jocassee Lake Tours. Dan was one, and we had a meeting and we said, "Okay, if we were to do this, what would we want to learn about the Jocassee Gorges, and who would we want to lead these programs?" And so we kind of came up with a list of things and then a list of people that was like the stars in the field. And we started working with them one at a time, and they came on board. And so therefore, this program called Jocassee Wild Naturalist was born. Whoops, wrong way, Katie. Okay. Still didn't have anything to do with kids, right? So we were kind of fumbling around. From 2019, we kind of started a little bit of a rocky start, and then we started to get a little bit of traction. And in 2020, we had all these schools signed up and ready to come out for programs at Lake Jocassee. March came along and shut the lake down, and all those programs had to be canceled. 2021 came along, people still weren't doing field trips. So it was a bit of a rocky start. 21 actually, we started getting a few people out. And then 22, we started gaining a little bit of traction. We got a few more schools, and then things started to get kind of interesting. This year, through the Jocassee Wild Child program that is led by my friend Carrie McKenzie, we have over 300 school children signed up, ready to come out on Lake Jocassee. So yay. But why? What's so great about Jocassee? It is part of the Jocassee Gorges, which you just saw that wonderful shot of. Let's see if I can go in the right direction this time. No. Got it right there. Pam? I'm working on it, guys. It should be the next one. Okay, that's it. All right. So what we learn in the Jocassee Gorges can be learned in a lot of different places, but this place is particularly special. We can learn geography. We can learn geology. We learn about the watersheds. We learn the history. So much biology. If you want to learn, gosh, anything from mycology to ichthyology to what are some of those other ologies that I had a long list of earlier and can't think of one now. But there's so many different facets of the natural world that you can learn just by coming out onto Lake Jocassee. So these kids are not going to learn it all in a day. What they're going to learn to do is to experience this place and to love this place. So we want them to come out, we want them to learn, but we want them to learn in such a way that they're having fun and they don't realize they're actually learning. That's our goal. So when I was in school, here's how we learned something. Somebody put a map up on a board and said, there you go, there's your geography lesson for the day. But this geography lesson is kind of interesting. And you can, gosh, you can't even really see it. But what you're looking at in the green is all of the temperate rainforest of the world. And if you'll notice, almost all of them are edged around a large body of water. And then you get over in Southeast Asia and you see that there is a region that goes from Tibet, it goes through Bhutan, it kind of edges Burma, and then it goes into China. And all of that is a temperate rainforest, and those areas share a lot of the same families of plants and a lot of the genuses that we have here in the Jocassee Gorges. But what you can't see very well is right in the region that would be Appalachia, there is another little tiny sliver of green, which represents the Appalachian temperate rainforest. So that's where we begin, in the Appalachians. And if you go back to your geography lessons, you remember that the Appalachians are split up into provinces. We are in the Blue Ridge province of the Appalachian Mountain chain. And the Jocassee Gorges is tucked right up at that south base of something that is the escarpment for the mountains. And these mountains have got an interesting orientation in that instead of going straight southwest to northeast like most mountains do in the Appalachian Range, along this front, they turn just a little bit in some little twist of the way they were formed. And as a result, they form a bowl around this area that we call the Jocassee Gorges, and they capture rain. You guys have heard me say this, so you know this story. The moist air banks up against the mountains. It goes from 800 feet to over 3,000 feet in a very short period of time. As that moisture hits the mountains, it's forced up, it cools, it condenses, it forms rain clouds, and it rains. And boy, does it rain. Dan, have you ever been caught in the rain? Everybody who's been on a Jocassee Lake tour just about has been caught in the rain if you've been with us more than once. It is actually one of the joys, I think, now of being out on the lake, is getting caught in a authentic situation, in an authentic place. So lots of rain, and that creates a big watershed for the Savannah River, and that water goes all the way down to the Atlantic Ocean. So you're talking about this to a bunch of kids, right? And you know what happens? Something very much like that. Because if you learn from maps, you're not going to be really engaged. You're just going to kind of hear it, and it's probably going to go in one ear and out the other. So if you tell these kids that you're in a place where the mountains used to be bigger than the Rocky Mountains, sometimes they can't relate to that either, because some of these kids have never been to the Rocky Mountains. But over time, these gentle rolling hills that people laugh at when they've been to the Rockies have just weathered down and eroded. And so therefore, we can talk about the effect of watersheds, and we can show them by the contours of the hills the way that water has cut down through the hills over literally hundreds of millions of years and created this wonderful landscape that we know as the Jocassee Gorges today. So they can kind of get that, right? You go out with kids and they're like, okay, I can kind of see where water is cut down through here. But if you say, okay, these mountains have eroded one grain at a time, water and wind have carried these mountains down to the Atlantic Ocean. And then you show them this. And the kids who were out on this same beach in 2021 were playing on a rock that turned into two rocks by 2022. Those kids are going to start to get it. They're going to start to relate to this word called erosion and the way the mountains are worn down. So what is really so special about the Jocassee Gorges? I mean, there's a lot of good places. You can go into the gorges by different avenues. You can go up Horse Pasture Road, go to Jumping Off Rock. So why the lake? It's because you can go out and within 4 hours, we can take you to so many different cool habitats and show you what's there. We can show you geology, for instance, by taking you around this little place that I like to call Streak Island. And when you're talking about erosion and you're talking about the way sediment builds and builds and builds and then presses what's underneath it down until it just becomes soft and almost molten, and it rearranges itself into a whole different kind of rock, you can demonstrate that there. And then when you talk about this force of these continents that very, very, very slowly crush together and uplift sections of land into big rumples, you can show them that in this one little tiny island. And then when you talk about the way this forcing up also fractures rocks, and when those rocks split and crack and fracture, sometimes they slip. And then you can look at the streaks in that rock over in your middle picture, and you can see how they don't line up anymore, and you can show them an actual fault. And that gets kids to thinking. That gets adults to thinking. So that's a really good point right there. When we developed this program, we realized that the same things that we were teaching or wanted to teach or were teaching to adults, kids, could also be applied. The same subjects can be applied with greater detail, can be applied to college students. And people talk about how, you know, as you get older, you kind of lose that sense of wonder. And, you know, when you're a kid, it's just all so fresh and so new. Well, let me tell you something. You guys haven't lost anything. When you come out and you see the simplest things, even if it's presented to you on a third grade level, it is new and exciting again, and it makes you want to learn more. So we can take the same subjects that we're teaching to a college age, and we can bring it to teach OLLI, South Carolina Native Plant Society, many different groups that I also can't think of right now. And then we can just take out a lot of those details and we can present that to third, fourth, fifth, sixth graders, and they get it. And we're not looking to teach these kids, we're looking to just make them ask questions and to be curious and to want to learn more about whatever it is you're showing them. So the thing about the Jocassee Gorges is because it is easily accessible by boat, we can take you from a desert environment, which is called the wall, where desert ferns have been found, 3 different species that grow nowhere else in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee. These ferns, the closest ones, are found in the deserts of Texas, the deserts of Arizona, the deserts of California. But this hot, dry, sun beating down in an environment, very well drained, was the perfect place 50 years ago when this quarry was blasted out to build what is now known as the Jocassee Dam. It was a perfect place for spores to land and to create a habitat, not just for 1 or 2 specimens. These plants, literally 2 of them, have got hundreds or thousands of specimens growing on that wall. So we take kids to the desert and we tell them about that. 20 minutes later, we can take them into a lush, green, temperate rainforest. 1 little short boat ride. And you can't do that really by driving up to Jumping Off Rock. This is pretty unique, something that Lake Jocassee offers that's just not found in other places. So our goal when we do this is, number 1, to get you off the boat. So we want to explore, we want to find out what grows around the edges of the lake. And I can tell you, not all that much, not in some places. But then we take you up into these rocky streams and creeks, and we teach kids, for one thing, ethics of where they are and how to act there. And when you take a rock and you lift it up to see what's going to live under it, then they learn that you're going to put that rock back in the exact same place they got it from. When you roll over a log to see if anything is living under there, you're going to roll that log back exactly like it was, because things live there, even if we can't see it, and we don't want to disturb that. And it's a really good lesson for kids. We can just kind of extend that into leaving no trace. So if you're going to get out and eat your lunch, you're not going to leave your trash behind. If we see trash, we're going to pick it up. We're trying to set a really good example. But we take them to the rocky streams, and we get out and walk up there, and that's great fun. And then we visit spray cliff communities, and we talk about the plants and animals that need that constant moisture to survive. And we found the best amphibian pond up in the mountains. And that was kind of a cool surprise, just kind of beating around one day, and lo and behold, this little pond never dries up. It's got a tiny little stream that feeds it, and a tiny little stream that leaves it via the logging road that probably created it and flows on down the mountain to Lake Jocassee. But in the meantime, this little pond doesn't have any fish in it. So what it does have is frogs and salamanders and snakes. And we can go at the right time of year and we can find egg masses, or we can find immature salamanders, tadpoles, all these kinds of cool things. So getting kids involved is just kind of the way we go about this. Kids and adults. We don't really hesitate to take adults up there either, guys. So bring a walking stick. There's no telling where we might be taking you. We try to look in all kinds of different places to see what's there. We're going to look in holes. We're going to look under rock houses. We're going to get the loops out. We're going to poke and poke and poke. And then we're going to poke some more. And so if there is any kind of opening anywhere that we can't quite see to the end of, we're just going to go stick our heads in there and see what comes out. So it's a lot of fun. So we look and look and look. When we have adults on the boat, we encourage you to bring binoculars. That is a good way to look at things. One of the things that I am most proud of is that when the kids come out, we're up to 32 now. We got 8 to go. We need more because we're getting more and more kids. But we have backpacks, little string backpacks that we give them. And in the backpacks, we've got an erasable clipboard that they can write on with these special markers. And they can draw things and they can write little poems and whatever they want to do. We got a little notebook so they can take notes and make lists. We've got a loop that we show them how to use. Put it up to your eye, kids, and bring this up there and you can see things a lot better. It's like, wow, I never knew that looked like that. And then we have binoculars. And these kids each get a pair of real binoculars, waterproof, drop proof. They're good ones. But they've got really good optics. And so as soon as they see those in the bag, it's all over. That's all they want to do is look around the trees and in the water and along the shoreline and tell us what's there. So when they do that, they find stuff. They are going to find all kinds of stuff. All kinds of stuff. The millipedes. One thing we ask them when we start on the boat, because millipedes are pretty easy to find around Jocassee during the summer. So we'll say, have you ever held a millipede? And they'll inevitably go, ooh, no, those are poisonous. So by the time the day is over, everybody has held a millipede and they realize the difference between something that is going to hurt them and something that is not going to hurt them. And most of these things out here they discover are not going to hurt them. So in that case, we're going to, we get crayfish. We don't pick up the spiders. That's a fishing spider. But we do pick up the millipedes. We find the imperial moth sometimes. This little girl's got a snake. We don't pick up the bears. We do not do that. But every now and then we do get really lucky and see one. So we kind of never know what we're going to see. It's been a really interesting decade on Lake Jocassee because when you least expect it, something's going to pop up like a bobcat. Who's going to expect that? You can't plan for that. You can't even plan for a stinking bald eagle because as soon as you say the word, you'll never see one that day. But we do see them. We see otters. We see, this is crazy, a snake eating a fish. Catch that action every now and then. An eagle eating something that we don't even want to know what it is. Probably a fish. But not too long ago, we were out and we happened to, in one day, and Pam Barber's got pictures of every one of them. I know this is going to sound hard to believe, but we did. We saw 3 different bald eagles eating 3 different squirrels in one day. Catching and eating. What was up with that? I do not know. Never seen it before. Probably will never see that again. Swimming squirrels, swimming chipmunks, swimming pigs, swimming deer, swimming bears, bears in trees. We caught one day 3 cubs up a tree with mama standing there behind the bush watching us to see what we would do. We didn't do anything. We just watched. And then that little baby came around and watched us back. Very curious. So you never know. Sometimes though, because we can't plan trips and we can't plan study around things that we don't know we're going to see. So we do try to figure out things that we do know we're going to see. For instance, we can talk about the faded trillium, which only grows in the upper savanna watershed. We can talk about the Oconee bell, which has an even narrower range and only grows natively in that little block of land called the Jocassee Gorges. We can talk about the plant that literally brought the first explorers up in the Jocassee Valley, which was Magnolia fraseri. We can talk about loons, which come to Lake Jocassee every winter and spend the winter as reliably as some people go down and spend the winter in their condos in Florida. The loons come here, same loons. And a new surprise for us that we found 2 or 3 years ago, a carnivorous plant in that wonderful turn of events where plant eats animal. There are sundews that grow right above the edge of the water on Lake Jocassee. It's amazing. It's amazing what you're going to find there. All these different habitats. And bald eagles. We've got 2 nests, maybe 3 that we know of that are not inhabited. And now we've got 1 that we know of that is inhabited. So today, 2 eagles on the nest. Come out and see that. During April, that's the time that you're going to see the babies hatching out. And you start to see them peek their big little heads up. And eventually you start to see them move out on the branches like these guys were doing. These are very young juveniles who were just learning to fly. So again, no telling what you're going to see. Kind of odd things. We've got kids. We're working a lot with kids that are in the later elementary school, and what they're learning in school has to do with species variation and species adaptations and species habitat. So we work with that a lot. And we talk about things like, how is it that an algae, which is a water-loving little thing, can grow inside of a fungus on the side of a rock? Like, what allows that to happen? That is an adaptation. What allows a fish to live in the water? That's an adaptation. What allows a leaf miner to live inside one single leaf of a holly? Pretty cool stuff. And it's kind of stuff that we look at every day and kind of go, huh, well, we look past it sometimes until somebody points it out and says, isn't this pretty amazing that this little leaf miner has lived its life inside this leaf? And then it becomes like the most fascinating thing you've ever seen. And you want to go out and find more fascinating things like that. And that's what we're after. How can a bird spend its life in the water? What's that about? This bird, until it's ready to lay some eggs and raise some chicks, it does not come out of the water. Well, it flies back and forth, so it does have wings. It is a bird, but it can also dive underwater and stay for 5 minutes at a time. How did that crazy thing happen? Another adaptation. Cool stuff. Where am I? Was I there? I hope I was there. Otherwise, that would have been just that would have been a funny talk about things that you couldn't see. So anyway, when we do this, we don't know everything. So we bring in people that know a lot more than we do. That is one of the beauties of this. So we have had people who have been leading us along the way, who are kind of the leaders in their field, I would say. We've got Dr. Don Hagan talking about trees, bioecology. We've got Bill Ranson, tells us about geology. Chick Gaddy makes an appearance every now and then. If you native plant people know who Chick Gaddy is, he's a little bit of a rock star in that world as far as plant shortia goes, which is also known as the Coney bells. Rocky Nation works with us. Patrick McMillan, Dr. John Haynes, Dr. Alan Weekly, You guys know who that is? He is rewriting the book on the nomenclature of plants. And then in the lower corner is our personal heroes who have been with us, teaching us longer than anybody else. And that is our loon researchers, biologists Jay Mager and Jim Peruke. And very happy to know that they'll be joining us again soon. So we learned from some really good people when we had that initial meeting and we said, okay, we want to do this, but who's going to lead it? Who's going to teach us these things? And we did that little brainstorming session. We just went to the top and we said, we'll think of the very best people that we can possibly think of who also know and love the Jocassee Gorges, because that's important. And all but one of them said yes. And he was moving up into Canada, so we'll forgive him for that. So Lake Jocassee attracts all of these people back. They love this place and they want to come and spend time and just poking around again and kind of reacquainting themselves. So that's pretty cool. But we're looking at a man-made lake. And if it weren't for Lake Jocassee and Duke Power building it back in 50 years ago now, we wouldn't have some of the things that we have today. So today we have common loons here. They would not have been here before the lake was here. We have bald eagles. They were not here before the lake was here. On the flip side of that, our beloved little plant has lost about 80% of its habitat to the lake. So it's always a good thing, bad thing, you know, when you're looking at something that changed a landscape as dramatically as Lake Jocassee changed the Jocassee Gorges. There are things that have been lost that we really don't even know. But the Oconee Bell story is a very good segue into talking about the history of Jocassee. So let's go to that for just a minute. We don't know for sure who the first white man was to ever walk through the Jocassee Gorges. I always say it was Andre Michaud, but I don't really know that. I wasn't around then. We do know that Andre Michaud, who discovered Shortia galaxifolia, aka Oconee bells, he was the first person to ever write it down. So we know he was there. And we also know pretty exactly where he traveled through Oconee County. And this is because of an amazing person who was a local. Her name was Margaret Mills Seaborn, and she was interested in Michaud's journey, but she was also interested in Bartram's journey. She was interested in everybody who stepped foot in Oconee County back in the early days. And she did what turned out to be very, very accurate mapping of the routes that people took from Clemson up along the upper reaches of the Savannah River into the Seneca River and the Kiowa River. And she traced, just dang near step by step, exactly where Michaud walked up into the valley. It's remarkable work that she did. And so you've got the map, the bigger map that she's got there through the county, and then a little bit closer shot of it that shows that he came up the Kiowa River, he crossed over, Michaud did, just a little bit south of the confluence of the Whitewater and the Toxaway, crossed the river, continued his journey up the Whitewater River, and I didn't realize this before, but now I'm looking at the map more closely. He kind of skirted around Hester Mountain and went up more the Thompson River side at first, and then looped back, and then went up the Whitewater side. And when we go to the Whitewater Gorges and we look at that and think, how did anybody walk up those gorges ever? And fishermen say they've done it, but to think that you've got horses with you, you've got a little push cart with you, you've got all of this stuff that he had to carry, including his specimens, including the paper that he had to write on. I mean, it's remarkable what this man did. But the important thing is, he was the first white man that we know of that walked up the Jocassee Gorges, but he was far from the first man. We do know that the Jocassee Valley was settled long before Michaud ever came here. And the story of the Native Americans in the valley is not one that I really broach a whole lot with children, other than to say, wow, isn't this cool? This is how they lived. And, you know, they lived along the rivers and they did this as far as getting their food. But we don't go into a lot of the history, which is also fascinating. It kind of revolves around another European structure called Fort Prince George. But as you get older, you need to know the story of Fort Prince George. And I'm not going to go into it here because it is a brutal story and it's kind of hard to tell. But if you're not familiar with it, look into that and just understand this place. When you know the history, even if you are not from here, like I am not from here, I was not born here. I've just been here a while now. But if you get to know the history, it connects you to the place. And that place becomes yours more and more. And so that's what I'm after for people who come out, families who have just moved in, is that connection. So they get to know how special this place is and how much history it does have behind it. And then we move on. So Fort Prince George did not last very long. Fortunately, we got through all the Cherokee wars. Cherokees, by hook or by crook, ceded the last bit of land. The line went right through the middle of Lake Jocassee, and that land was ceded in the 1800s. And then the rest was kind of the writing on the wall. We had settlers move up into the area and move into the Jocassee Valley area. And these are some of the dwellings that they had. We had the Jocassee Camp for Girls, which is kind of a historical place in its own right. The old Atakula Lodge there on the lower middle is the old Atakula Lodge. And it's kind of interesting to me. I was looking at this the other night and I was looking at the difference, or not the difference so much, but the similarities. There is a picture in the upper left-hand corner, which is an old house of Jocassee Valley. And then if you look at the lines of the house down in the Atakula Lodge in the lower middle, were they built by the same person? It's like it's almost the exact same plan of a house. So just kind of curious. Nice big place. But anyway, that kind of carries us up through into the era of the timber industries. And though Jocassee Valley was inhabited, the Jocassee Gorges, for the most part, were not. And most of the Jocassee Gorges became under the ownership of the timber industries from the late 1800s. And I want you to look at the size of the timber that was taken out of here. They had taken the big timber in the rest of the eastern seaboard, but they found this rugged, remote country where there were still really, really big trees. And the history of the railroad as it comes in from Pickens and goes up in the East Otoe Valley and then heading over into Laurel Fork area to get out those big trees is really fascinating. And the economic history of what went on there is equally fascinating because that didn't last long. They got the railroad in, they built all these logging camps. They started hauling this huge, huge timber out of there. And then there was a flood and the railroad kind of washed away and they didn't rebuild it. So Pickens was stuck with the largest saw blade that had ever been made to cut these big trees and this enormous mill that they had built to process all that. And then the railroad went away and they weren't bringing that big lumber out anymore. So it's kind of a sad story, I think, and especially for Pickens, if you get to learn that. And if you want to get more into it, then just look up the history of the railroads there, and that will take you all the way through all this history. But by the time Duke announced that they were going to build Lake Jocassee in 1965, there were still some awfully big trees left around the valley. And at that time, they had come in with bulldozers, and that was kind of the end of the Jocassee Gorges as it used to be. These bulldozers came and they cut logging roads all through the mountains, and they came in with trucks and they hauled out the rest of the big trees. And they talked about trees that they cut that were 7 feet in diameter. It's kind of hard to imagine, isn't it? They're all gone. And that recently, they were there, 1960s. But that was then. And today we got a beautiful lake in its place. And it's a wonderful place to come out and recreate, as they like to say. But I will emphasize over and over and over that it is a place to be respected, and it's a place to be cherished. And there's not many places left in the world like the Jocassee Gorges. So we want this younger generation to have the experience there, so they'll come to care about this place. So when they grow up and become voters, they will be taking care of it. That's really important. I've learned as I got older that you can't count on anything. If somebody waves enough money in front of you, you'll sell your mother. So all these places, you know, even private lands that we thought have been so very well protected, when the right turn of events comes along, sometimes they're not as well protected as we think. We think the Jocassee Gorges are pretty safe, but we want it to remain like that. So that's my soapbox. Duke came along in 1965 and announced that they were going to build this wonderful project called the POE Toxaway project. They were going to build a nuclear power plant, and they were going to build 2 lakes, 2 hydroelectric projects, all off of these 2 lakes. And then they proceeded to do that. So there's pictures of the valley before, and then pictures of the valley as it's about to go away, and then pictures from the dam looking into the lake. And now we have Lake Jocassee, which is beautiful, and I love it. And Brooks and I have made a nice living there, and we really are very thankful for that. But we're even more thankful that the state of South Carolina came along in 1997 and bought a good chunk of the Duke holdings. South Carolina Department of Natural Resources bought that, and that is what we know today is the Jocassee Gorges, and hopefully that will be protected for a long, long time to come. So I tell people that what they're looking at is not a pristine landscape. It's one that we've come in, we've cut it over, we've locked it to death, and now it's growing back. But it is a place where trees will get a chance to be old trees again. And that'll be pretty special. We don't have many places left like that, like I said. So all in all, I consider that all these things together make Jocassee Gorges the perfect outdoor classroom. But there's a tiny bit more. The Jocassee Gorges is also a place for renewal. And that's something that we're kind of we've known it from the beginning. We've always said Jocassee heals all. You go out in the lake, you're full of stress, you're mad, you're late, you're, you know, all frazzled. And you come in from an outing on Jocassee and everything is good. You just, no matter, you don't have to have seen any wildlife. You just had a very good day because the place does that for you. So the other day I ran across something and it kind of resonated with me. So I wrote it down here, and it says, nature literally has the power to heal. By slowing down and letting yourself notice the smell, sound, and feel of nature, you become present, aware, and often experience less stress. You become unbusy. So I would invite you guys to all join us. Keep up with our programs. Facebook is full of wild child stuff, and become unbusy. And that's all I've got to say about that. I appreciate you coming. I appreciate your patience. I appreciate that none of you seem to fall asleep, and I really do appreciate that a lot because it's been kind of a long evening. And for all of those on you on Zoom, I appreciate the fact that you hopefully couldn't see me at all. We're going to count on that. But thank you for coming, and come to Jocassee. Any questions? Any questions? You guys, I meant to tell you, if you have questions along the way, just, I've got to learn to do this with my eyes closed. And so. What's the dog? Micah. That's my Micah. Micah is the ship's dog. That was a birthday gift to my husband. And she's a little Buddha dog. Yeah.
Hang on. 41 back up.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah. There it is.
There it is. They need to be seeing you, not me. That's all I see.
Did anybody have a specific question about that? Or do you just want to pause to look?
Yeah, that's the only question I saw was this one. You said there was two?
I have
Wait
a
minute.
question.
Here we go.
Y'all don't have any questions. I answered everything.
What is the name of the nonprofit?
Jocassee Wild Outdoor Education. And that is an umbrella for, well, we have 3 programs under that now. So Jocassee Wild Outdoor Education is the way that you can find it. JocasseeWild.org. You can find it online. Under that, we have Jocassee Loon Watch. We have the Jocassee Wild Naturalist Program, which I would invite you all to partake in. It's a lot of fun. And we have the Jocassee Wild Child Program. And the Wild Child Program is the one that we raise money for. All of the money that we raise goes into the Wild Child Program and not into any of the other programs. You adults can pay for yourselves.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yep. Blue Wall Weekly.
That is all.
So Renee, you can go to jocasseewild.org and there's a donate button right there on the homepage. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience and wonderful presentation by Kay, as always. Awesome.
So I have another question. So how do children qualify for a GEM?
So we work with homeschoolers. We work with every school group and every group of children that we can get our hands on. We have tried so hard to build this and it's been a little bit tough, but we're really trying to work most specifically with children in the Oconee and Pickens and Anderson and Greenville County school districts. So if your child goes to a school, please encourage your teacher to come out, contact us about a field trip. If you are a homeschooler, you are very welcome to contact us at Carrie@jocasseewild.org. And we'll give you all the help and information you need. Or you can always call the office for Jocassee Lake Tours and we can get you there. So yeah, oh, thank you. That's why I have you. So coming up during the school breaks that are approaching in March and April, we have delegated 3 different days for teachers to be able to come out and experience what we learn on Lake Jocassee. Things that we're going to, present to your kids. It is $10 for teachers. It's a pretty good deal for a 4-hour day on Lake Jocassee, and I would encourage everybody who is able to come. Good. Thanks, Renee. Look forward to talking to you. Anybody else?
Anything else? Any questions out here? Anybody else? Your newsletter.
So that's that's more on the Jocassee Lake Tour side, and I had vowed that I wouldn't talk so much about Jocassee Lake Tours, but the Blue Wall Weekly is another bright idea of my husband's. Thank you, honey. He said, honey, why don't we start a weekly newsletter? And I looked at him and said, honey, do you know the definition of weekly? So we have been doing this. This is our 10th year. The 1st of April, we'll celebrate our 10th year doing the Blue Wall Weekly, and it's a calendar of outdoor events for things that go along the Blue Wall. We expand it just a little bit now into other areas that we think you might be really interested in. But it was started for the state parks because we've got, 7 or 8 state parks within a very close range. And to find out what kind of events they were holding on any particular week, you had to go to each one individually. So we thought we can compile this and put it out there for our guests. And so in the meantime, then we put up our schedules and we write a little bit about whatever's going on that week. So thank you for reading it. I appreciate that. Yes, including Native Plant Society stuff. Important stuff like that. Anybody else? There is one question here that is so broad. I think we kind of skipped over it because Cynthia's asking, can you talk more about what else has been lost or theater, how the critters that we have now have and are impacted, and the ecology of Lake Jocassee and then surrounding areas? And that's a huge question. So basically animals that were living where the lake is now can't live there anymore. That's a short answer. The lake has provided habitat for things that didn't live there before, like all kinds of water birds and bald eagles. And beyond that, that just gets into something that's probably kind of outside my theater. But thanks for asking that, Cynthia. Anybody else? Good? Good. You guys are released. Nothing else is there.
Do what? Okay. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for coming. We've got some refreshments in the back. Feel free to take any of that stuff home with you. Otherwise, it's going to go in the big round barrel. So I'm not taking it home. But anyway, hope to see you at our next meeting next month, March 21st.